at least the people that were close to him were able to take part in that blessing and take part in the knowledge and the joy of it. But it also brought joy to people who didn't even see it, who didn't even know that it happened, right? It brought a lot of joy to them. And that's kind of, I think, really the takeaway from this one. So we're going to start with chapter 1. I will just stop. I'm not going to read the whole thing through once. We're just going to kind of stop as we go along as we read. But he had just come out of the temptation. He has not even yet talked to Nicodemus. This is very, very early in his ministry. And it says, on the third day, we're starting with verse 1 of chapter 2 in John. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. So Jesus is in Galilee, right? Or he decides to set out for Galilee. He's picked up a couple of disciples, told them, come with me. So there's a few disciples. He doesn't have the full 12 yet, but he has some with him. And they have an invitation to this wedding, which means that obviously Jesus knew these people, right? He was an invited guest to this wedding. And I say that specifically because John tells us specifically that he was invited. The Catholic tradition is that this was Jesus' wedding. This is something that a lot of Catholics believe, that he was marrying Mary and Martha of Bethany and also Mary Magdalene. Well, now this obviously, one, makes no sense in the timeline of Jesus' life, but two, under Mosaic law, it was illegal to marry sisters, and three, he was an invited guest to this wedding. This was not his wedding. But this is, for some reason, something that they traditionally will say that this was, so just kind of a pushback on that, that it doesn't make sense in the way John reads here. But anyway, it says that he was invited guest to Cana of Galilee. Now, Cana, just for reference, was a small town. There's some disagreement on exactly where it was, but it was probably a few miles from Nazareth. Philip, which was one of the disciples, was from Galilee. Possibly a couple of from Cana. Possibly a couple of the other ones were from Cana. Jesus would have been known in this area, but it was a little bitty nothing town. Right? Just a little country town, little podunk town. Kind of the town that we're all from. Just a little, whoever it is that's getting married was well known to Mary, was well known to Jesus, but they were not somebody as the world would deem somebody. They're just a little common folk from a little country town, right? But Jesus goes. In the midst of his ministry has started. He is now on a ministry to save the world, right? He has a mission. He has things in front of him, both good and hard. He has all of this stuff in front of him that he knows that he has to do. He has people he has to meet. He has sin that he has to atone for. He has persecution that he's going to have to face. And Jesus takes time to go to a wedding of friends he knows. Right? This is a very personal thing. He takes time. He danced at the wedding. He laughed at the wedding. He enjoyed fellowship at the wedding. Right? He takes time to be personal with the people that he loves and the people that invite him in. And today, he still takes time to celebrate with the people that he loves and the people that invite him into their lives. And I think that it's a beautiful example of Christ's personality, right? It's a beautiful example of who he is. When we're reading the Bible, we should read the Bible trying to learn who God is, who Christ is. They're not only what they've done, but who they are, what their character is, right? Who he is in my life. And he is somebody that celebrates. He is somebody that celebrates with you. He will laugh when you're joyful, right? It grieves him when you're hurting. He feels all of the emotions. He's a personal God. He's a personal Christ. And we see that throughout this little section here, this miracle here. So the mother of Jesus was there, and we're going to see, I think that she's probably very close to the people whose wedding it is, but the fact that she was there, and it doesn't mention Joseph, at this point we can assume that Joseph had died, right? I think that this is probably common belief at this point. Otherwise, Joseph would have been mentioned, the father, right? Because that's the culture of the time, but it mentions only Mary. It's possible that the reason that Jesus stayed in Nazareth for so long is because he had to take care of his mom after the passing of Joseph. And he needed to wait until his brothers were old enough that they could kind of assume some of that responsibility for him to leave and go off and start his ministry. That's just supposition, but in the culture of that time, that makes sense. So it says, so they're at this wedding, and it's a big extravagant. Weddings were like a week-long affair in the culture of that time, right? Wine was flowing all the time, and we'll get into that in a minute. But it was definitely earlier I said that the Catholics said this about, I didn't mean the Catholics. I am so sorry. I meant the Mormons. This is Mormon. I knew when I said it, something didn't sound right, and it just clicked. This is Mormon teaching, obviously with the polygamy and that kind of thing. So that was Mormon teaching, not Catholics. But anyway, so weddings were a joyous affair, right? And it says, verse 3, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come. And his mother said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. So the fact that the wine ran out, to us sounds like no big deal. But to the culture of that time, it was a huge deal. And right now, there's only a few people that know that the wine ran out, because they're not going to broadcast this to the people that are at the wedding. They're not going to, probably even the bride and groom don't know at this point, because if you've been to a wedding and you help you protect, especially the bride, at all costs. You don't, and so most likely the bride and groom at this point didn't even know. Okay, but the fact that the wine had ran out was a huge cultural taboo thing, and there was a couple of different reasons. It could have been that the wine ran out because this was a poor family. They had to, for people to come to their wedding, especially if they lived any distance, they would have to take off work. Remember, this is a week-long affair. So if they didn't live next door, they had to take off work and come and stay with the people hosting the wedding. We thought our weddings were stress, right? But they literally were required to care for. They said, I have lost a week's wages. You need to recompensate, right? You have to take care of me so I don't feel that. And part of that was the wine that was served. Part of that was the feast that was given. So it could be that they were poor and they just bought enough that they could, what they could afford, and hoped that it stretched far enough. Or it could be because weddings were so extravagant and guests were coming and going constantly that they just miscalculated and didn't know, how much for sure to buy. Either way, this could have actually led to them being sued. This was how serious it was. They could have, and if it was a poor family, and we know that Cana was just a poor town, that it was not, something of extravagance itself. So if this was a poor family and they got sued, like we're talking, they're taking something that they don't even have at that point. That's how serious running out of wine would have been in that time. That would have haunted them, especially the husband who was required to pay and take care of his wife, not pay for his wife, but pay to take care of his wife. This would have been a big social black mark on his reputation, and reputation was a huge thing, right? Who he was, that kind of thing. If he can't provide for the wedding, how's he going to provide for his wife? Right? So can you begin to see that had the husband and wife known the panic that this would have ensued? And the people that did know, Mary obviously was close enough to them that she's concerned, right? Because she takes it upon herself to go, we've got to fix this. We cannot let this happen to the bride and groom. We cannot let them undergo possible reputation, being shattered or being sued or any of those things. So we've got to fix this. So we know that she's probably pretty close to the family. And so what does she do? She goes to Jesus. And we don't know for sure. I do want to say real quick, wine in the Bible is a symbol of joy. And so as we go through this miracle, remember that. Remember this is about joy. Psalms 104 verse 15 says, wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen the man's heart. Wine was to gladden the heart, bring joy to the heart of man. Judges 9:13 says, the trees said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But the vine, we're talking about a vineyard, right? Which wine comes to, but the vine said to them, shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men and go and hold sway over the trees? To the Jewish mind, wine equaled joy. Okay, so if you come to a wedding and I attended a wedding one time. I was paid to photograph the wedding back when I did photography. And this wedding, the bride and groom sat at their little table. We're talking about the reception, not the wedding. The bride and groom sat at their table, the lights were darkened, and nobody said a word. It was the most awkward, uncomfortable reception I had ever been to. I was able to take like 4 pictures because nobody moved. Nobody talked. There was no smiling. There was no laugh. Not from the bride and groom. Not from the people at the wedding. You would almost think this was a forced wedding, but it wasn't. Like they entered into this wedding and it was so uncomfortable. For them to run out of wine would have created that same atmosphere. It would have made a very morose, unhappy, uncomfortable reception, right? Wine equaled joy. And so Mary goes to Jesus and she tells him of her concern. She's like, we got to do something. They're out of wine. They're out of wine. Why did she go to him? Why did she assume that Jesus was going to be able to do something about it? She hadn't seen him perform a miracle yet. So she didn't know him as a miracle working God. But I think she knew him as somebody who fixed things, because most likely she depended on him since the death of her husband. Right? So she may not have been thinking, oh, he's going to perform a miracle. She could have been thinking, hey, you about to send a couple of disciples and go find some wine. We don't know for sure. But we do know that she has seen him step into the beginning of his ministry. She knows that he's Christ. Right? She knows that he's the Messiah. I mean, we studied how the angel came to her and gave her and the Bible tells us that she treasured these things in her heart. She thought about them. She pondered on them. So she knew, and she's seen Jesus get baptized, right? We've seen that happen. And the dove come in and God speak and say, this is my beloved son, right? So she knows that he's stepping into his ministry. She knows that he went into the wilderness and was tempted and overcame. She knows that this is the beginning of his ministry. So maybe she's going, hey, this is the perfect opportunity for him to tell everybody else who I know that he is. And it could be that when Christ comes out and everybody understands that he's the Son of God. Remember, we talked about at Christmas that Mary lived with a shroud over her head of bearing an ill-begotten child. Right? The shame of people knowing that she got pregnant outside of when she was married to Joseph, in that betrothal period when that was not okay. She had that hanging over her head, and we know that because people mention it to Jesus. So maybe, and I don't know this is just pure supposition, but maybe it's, hey, when people understand who he is, some of that shame will get lifted off me. They're not going to think what they think of me. Maybe it's a little of both. Maybe it's I want him to be shown. I want him to know. I want to push him and tell him to do what he needs to do to be the Son of God. And that helps me too. Because she's human. And I imagine it was hard for 30 years to live with that hanging over her head and nobody being willing to believe her. So she goes to Jesus and she says, go ahead.
She also knew that her cousin John the Baptist was going to lead the way.
Yes. Well, and she's already seen John the Baptist declare him as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. She's seen John baptize him. Like these events have already happened. And so yes, John was very much a prominent part at the beginning of Jesus' life. And then what does Jesus say? He says, woman, one of my boys come up to me and they say, woman, I'm liable to smack them. I don't care that they're grown boys, right? I don't care that they're adults. You don't come up to me calling me woman. But culture was different. Woman was a sign of respect, but it was not a sign of familiarity. Okay, so we will see Jesus call a lot of women, woman. The Syrophoenician woman, I think he calls a woman. The woman at the well, he calls a woman. Like, it's a sign of respect. It would be like us coming up to a stranger and saying, ma'am, you dropped whatever. It's a sign of respect, but it's not a sign of familiarity. Okay? And even on the cross, Jesus calls his mother woman. Right? He's putting distance between himself and Mary. Mary has come to him and told him to do something. But Christ has already stepped into his mission. Right? He has now stepped into doing the Father's will, not Mary's. And I think in this moment, he says, what's that do? What's that to do with us? Right? He's saying, hey, it's no longer a time where you can tell me what to do. I'm now on my Father's clock. I'm now doing my Father's mission. Right? It's what is your concern? Basically what this means, what's that to do with us? If you take it back to the Greek language, or the traditional language, it's what does your concern have to do with me? So you can see where he's kind of separating himself and letting her know, you can no longer have that authority over me. My authority now comes from my Father. I do what my Father says. So I think, even though this miracle reads as if immediately he says something, I think he stepped off to pray. He stepped off to check in with God. And why do I think that? It's because in John chapter 5, Jesus says, most assuredly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, the Son also does. And then again in John chapter 5, he says, I can do nothing of myself. I don't seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. And then again in twice in John 8, he says, I do nothing of myself, but my Father taught me, so I speak these things. And then again, for everything that I do to please him. So we see that everything that that Christ did on earth, it was to please the Father. He checked in and with God continuously, right? So I think that this is what we're seeing in this rebuke that Jesus gives Mary. And that's exactly what it is. It's him stepping back and going, hang on. I can't follow your will anymore. You cannot speak and tell me what to do anymore. That doesn't mean that he's saying I won't do it. He's making sure that she understands he's now doing a different mission. He has a different role to play. He says, my time has not yet come. And this used to always confuse me. Because I always thought he meant, the time for me to step into my ministry has not yet come. But we know that he has stepped into his ministry. He's been baptized. He went to the temptation. He's done all these things. And then he goes and does it. So if he's saying, hey, it ain't time for me to start performing miracles, and then he performs miracles, well, that doesn't really make sense. But any time that Christ speaks of his time or the hour, he's speaking of his death. He's not speaking of the beginning of his ministry. He's speaking of his death. I think 7 times, just in the book of John, he refers to his hour. And I'm not going to go through each one of them. But it's in John 2, John 7, John 8, John 12, again in John 12, John 16, John 17. It's always talking about, and we see stages. At first, they couldn't touch him because it's not his hour had not yet come. Or, he tells the disciples, my mind just went blank. So, but he talks to the disciple about his hour coming. And then when he's in the garden, he's like, Lord, if you can, let me out of this hour, but it's for this hour that I came. And then he's on, So we see the progression of the hour that he's talking about. So why would he mention his death at the wedding? Like, how does that, you're here celebrating. It's a joyous time, right? So why would he mention his hour being the hour of his death at a wedding for a miracle that Mary is asking? I don't know, 100%. But I can't help but think that the wedding reminds him of his wedding to us, right? And for his wedding to us, he has to die. His blood has to be shed. For him, they are interlinked. And I think that made him reminisce on what's to come, the mission that he has in front of him. That yes, his blood is going to have to be shed, right? And it's going to require his death for him to be able to take his bride at the feast. Do I know this for sure? No, but it's what makes most sense to me. And I think that's beautiful. You know? It's heartbreaking in its own way because he's seeing something joyful and he's going to have to endure such trauma for us. But because of that, we're going to be able to be his bride. And he's looking forward to that. Right? So it's both joy and sadness. Right? Or joy and, I don't even know that he was so much sad as grief. One, that he would have to do this. That we have brought it to this point. He says, my time's not yet come. My hour isn't here yet. It's not time for me to die. It's not time. I have time to do the will of the Father. I have time to do what he's called me to do. And he prays, and she says, probably one of the most important verses in the whole Bible. What he tells you to do it. What we can't learn from what Mary tells to the servants. What he tells you to do it. Do it. You want to take part in the blessing? Be obedient. You want to see the miracles? Do what he tells you to do. What he tells you to do it. Anybody got anything before we go on? Because I can just keep talking and then nobody gets a chance to say anything.
Well, there is one thing. It's so neat how he says that. It's like he's saying, be still. He's saying all in good time. And he's like you said, with respect, like, know your place. But since the man is head of the household, he's trying to show that, yes, you know, like, that will all be done, but, you know, to just, you know, be still.
Right. And yeah, in a way, he's telling Mary, this is no longer in your power. This is mine. Right? You can't. And we need to remember that. We need to remember that. Okay, let's just go ahead in verse 6. Now there were 6 stone water pots set there. First of all, 6. That's like between 120 and 180 gallons will 6 water pots hold. That's a lot. Just imagine that. In water alone. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's heavy. That's a lot. It's a lot of water, right? There were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. So they filled them up to the brim. So the water pots there, John makes a point to make sure that we understand they're for purification. They're the cleansing. It's the water that they would hold to purify, to cleanse themselves with. And they had all types of ritual washings, right? We know this if we read Leviticus. But it was a religious ceremony that they would use the water in these pots for. Notice the pots were empty. The custom would have been that as the guests came in before they were to eat or anything of that thing, they would take the water pots, they would pour it, because in the cleansing rituals, the water had to be what they called living or moving water. It could be, they could stick their hands in it, then that would contaminate the water. The water had to be poured on top of them for them to wash, for them to cleanse themselves, so they could not be ceremonially unclean, right? So they had done this to all their guests. The water pots are empty, right? The stone, I mean, that all goes into what they will absorb and stuff like that. We're not going to kind of get into all that. But Jesus tells the servants, he says, go fill them up with water. All 6 of them, 30 gallons each, because they filled them to the brim. Right? Kudos to the servants. Because you give me a pot and you ask me to fill something up with water, but I need wine, and that pot's heavy, it's already stone. So the pot's heavy even empty. What's the chances that I'm going to fill it up to the brim? Probably low, because I'm like, I gotta carry it back. We don't know how far they had to go to fill them up and carry them back. They were probably thinking, what in the world? Why would I have to do this? Well, this makes 0 sense. We need wine and he's asking for water. Why would I do that? But they did it. One, I think Mary was over them, and Mary gave them a commandment. They did not have the option to not do what was said, to do what they were told, and they didn't have the option to mouth about it. But in their brain, I can guarantee, at least for a split second, they went, this man's crazy. This is nuts. I'm gonna do it because I gotta do it, but this is weird, y'all. And I imagine all of them, because those things were heavy. It took more than one person per pot. All of them were thinking it as they went down to get the water. But they filled them up to the brim. There was no room in those pots for anything else. There was nothing that God could, or Jesus could put in those pots to turn it to wine. There was nothing that could be added to somehow make that, they had their people of the day. There's nothing that could have been added. It was completely full. The servants did it to the brim. When you obey Christ, obey him to the fullest. Obey him to the fullest, because what happened? When the water turned into wine, remember we talked about they were probably, the family was probably most likely too poor, right? They had excess. 180 gallons of wine is more than enough wine for all of the people for more than a week. But what happens is afterwards, the overflow, they could sell, right? And then that could keep them living for a while. They could spread joy. There was an overflow. With Jesus and the 5,000, when he fed the 5,000, what happened? There was overflow, right? There's overflow in obedience. When they filled it up to the brim, Christ was able to turn it into wine, and there was more than enough. Christ isn't here to just give you enough to squeak by. Spiritually, he says, I bring you life and life more abundantly. Right? He lives, and he desires for you to live in the overflow, and all of the extra that he has for you. What joy that is. What peace. What greatness when you begin to understand, if I just obey him to the brim, right? I do exactly what he says, and I do it to the fullest. He's going to take that fullness, and he's going to give me more than I need. He's going to give me more spiritually than I need. He's going to give me, does that mean that you're going to have all of the riches of the world? No. But he's going to give you all that you need and some. Sometimes what we think we need and what we truly need is different. But when we understand our true need and what Christ gives us in our true need, we will understand the overflow that we're living in. There's a song, I think, Living in the Overflow. I hope I can find that. It's an older song. Maybe verse 8, and he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. And when the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants knew, the head waiter said to the bridegroom, or called to the bridegroom and said to him, every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. Now, the head, mine says head waiter. Some of them says like the Lord.
Servants. Servants.
No. The Lord of the feast, or the Lord of the, not the servants.
No, it's like a shepherd.
Huh?
Be like the chaperone.
Yeah, he's the one in charge. He's the one, and that's the main guy, right? So Jesus, he doesn't take the wine to all of the people first, right? He tests. He says, here, test it. Well, now we don't know how or when the water turned into wine because it doesn't tell us. Jesus never spoke a word to the water. He just did it. He did it quietly. They brought all of the water up, and he's like, okay, now dunk your little cup in it and take it to the head waiter. Take it to the head master. Take it to the man in charge. Take it to the man. Right? So they dunked their water, or their cup into the water, and somewhere between them bringing the water, dunking the cup, and taking it to the man, it was wine. And Jesus never had to say a word.
You were talking about that song. According to Google, there's a song out that's living in the overflow by people. And
by who?
People and songs feet. Charity Galley.
Charity Gale.
Josh Sherman. This song is directly addressed the concept of the lyrics like, I am living in the overflow.
I know I knew the song. I'm living in the overflow. Come on, guys. If that's not joyful, this is a miracle of joy. And when we understand that in Christ, when we bring His all, when we do what He says, we fill Him to the brim, we do exactly what we're living in the overflow. That is joyful. That is something that we should be excited about. I don't have to walk around every day going, now I gotta, how am I gonna, oh my goodness, I don't have enough. No, I'm gonna walk around going, Lord, you supply, I'm living in the overflow. Whatever it is that you have for me, I'm in the overflow. Whether it be to my eyes, if it doesn't look like I'm in the overflow, you know what? I am. Because He supplies everything that I need, and He supplies it more abundantly than I need. And that means no matter what it looks like on the outside, if it looks like I have no wine, if it looks like there's not enough, I have the overflow. That should bring you so much joy. And it should lighten our load a little bit. People that live worldly, going to parties, living in excess, they're drinking, they're doing whatever. Y'all, these people think they're living in the overflow, and they are glad about it. Right? These are the cut-ups, the goofs, Christians who truly live in the overflow, if they just understand it, are some of the saddest people we've ever met. And we're in the overflow. We're in the true overflow. His grace, His mercy, His love, His supplying everything that we need. We are truly in the overflow. We need to get as excited as the rascal down the road who's excited about the next party he's going to.
Where's that quote that goes, my cup runneth over or overflows?
You're going to ask me where? Does anybody know exactly where that verse is? My cup runneth over?
Is it in Revelation?
No, I don't believe so, but I can't tell you. I'm so not good at that without.
Psalm 23?
I was going to say it was in Psalms, but I don't know where. Is it in 23?
The Lord is my shepherd.
Is it in the Lord is my shepherd? Maybe so.
Is that pastor?
Yep, Psalm 23. Thank you. Listen, I love my Bible. Memorizing chapter and verse, I'm terrible at. Terrible. I try to get better. I tell myself every year I'm going to memorize more. And I do for a while, and then it just goes right over my head. I don't know. My dad, my son, well, two of my sons, phenomenal at it. Like, they read a verse and they know it's there. They know where it's at. I didn't get that gene. I passed it down evidently, but I didn't get it. It's like the twin gene that skipped a generation. But anyway, so, let me hurry. Where was that? The servants knew. The servants got to take part in this blessing, right? They knew. They knew what happened. They knew about the miracle. They're the ones who obeyed, and they got a blessing for it. They got to see what Jesus did. Don't think because you might not have a position that is somebody, that you might not have a position that's in front of people. You might not have, you might look to the world as a servant, a nobody. Who did he go to? He went to the servants. They're the first ones to see the glory that God showed, that Christ showed that day. The servants, right? don't feel like. That's who we're called to be. Jesus Christ came as a servant, right? We are to be servants. This is the most glorious position there is. I was in I don't have time. I gotta keep going. So he says you kept the good wine until now. Why did he say that? Because typically you bring out the best wine, and when I say the best wine, I'm talking about taste. It tastes good. It's good on the tongue. It makes you feel good. It lightens your heart, right? There's a transformation on the inside. It brings you joy, right? And it says most people say the worst wine for last. Why? Because have you eaten something that you really, really wanted? I usually say this about ice cream. Usually a few bites, not that I stop at a few bites, but usually a few bites, that's the best bites, right? Because that's the most lively on my tongue. And then towards the end, I'm still eating it. It's not as good as those first few bites were. But he's saying, because our senses become muted, they become used to it. And so typically that's why people would leave the least tasting, the worst tasting wine till the end. But he's saying, wait a minute. You've been giving us all this wine and you're keeping the best wine till last. This most tasty, the best. This is when God makes something, he makes it the best. Right? He makes it the best. When we're in God, he gives us something, it is the best. Sometimes we're like, God, that's not really what I wanted. No, it's the best. We gotta change and remember. It's the best. He saves the best for last. And if we look at that in a spiritual sense, do you know what's coming at the end? We're walking through this world right now. But God's saving the best for last. And we have that to look forward to. We have the best to look forward to when I meet him face to face. Right? When I stand before him at the wedding that we are invited to be his bride. He is saving the best for last. And I can look forward, and no matter what the wine might taste like now, I know what's coming. Joy, guys. Joy. This is what we're here for. This is what Christ is here. He wants to instill in you joy. Not sadness, not upset, not morose, not all of the things that we tend to. We don't let this world get us down because we have the joy that God gives us. This is his first miracle. His chosen first was to bring people joy. That says something about his character, and that says something about the way he wants to relate to us. So he says, you have kept the good wine until now. Verse 11. This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and he manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now they already believed in him to begin with, or they were coming to believe, but this deepened their belief in him. Don't think that your faith can't be deepened as you go. Your faith when you first come to Christ is great. But as you walk with Christ, it should get deeper and deeper and deeper. Why? Because he proves himself to you over and over and over and over. And it's not like you're standing in judgment. Okay, you got to prove yourself. But he still does. He still works in your life where you can see him and believe in him more deeply. And that's where the disciples were. They seen it, and they believed in him more deeply. Right? It strengthened their faith. It says, they believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum. He and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. So, how much time do I have? 2 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay, the symbolisms of this. Christ says an I am statement. I am the true vine. Right? Let's remember that. I am the true vine. This is a miracle of conversions. From the old way of the law, remember those ceremonial pots? They represented the law. Right? But God transferred, he converted, is the word I'm looking for. He converted, and the new way of Christ is coming. The law is going to be done away with, but the new way, the new wine that we are entered into. This is represented here in this miracle. Huh? New covenant. Same, yeah. New covenant, the new wine, it's a passing of the old and new life with Jesus, right? Moses turned the water into blood, showing that the law ends in death, right? Y'all remember that? If not, I don't have time to go into it. But look in Exodus 7. But Jesus' first miracle was to turn water into wine, showing the gladness and the joy of his work, right? And it acts out what John said in John chapter 1. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. What do you want to live under? Which one brings you joy? The law or grace and truth? I love me some grace because I need it. And I'm so thankful for it, right? And I don't have time to go into the rest of the, and I was afraid of that. I kind of touched on most of it. Know that I think it's very telling that this was Christ's first miracle. It was a quiet miracle. Only few knew. But everybody reaped the benefits of it. Sometimes we don't see the little miracles because we're not looking for them. We're looking for the big showstopper, right? The one that everybody's wowed by. But Christ does these small, quiet miracles in your life every day.
Amen.
I know.
Every day. His first miracle, to show his glory, was a quiet miracle that everybody benefited from, but didn't know. It doesn't tell us that the headmaster who said, hey, this is the good wine, believed. It doesn't tell us that the bridegroom believed. But it does tell us that the disciples did. Be looking. Be a disciple. Look. Be willing to do what he says. Be willing to fill to the brim. And look for the miracles in your life. Those quiet ones that get us through every single day. That's God's first miracle, or Christ's first miracle. That is the first snapshot. Well, not the first, like the third snapshot that we're going to talk about. That's all I got for you.